Hi friends, I'm Max El-Hag. In this episode of the Corpus Animus podcast, I have training think tank coaches Kyle Ruth and Mike McGoldrick on the podcast to discuss dealing with burnout in CrossFit. If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. Get better at the sport of CrossFit alongside some of the best athletes in the world in our online training program, The Design. Head over to our website, trainingthinktank.com/DSGN to learn more.
I'm not burnt out.
I've never been burnt out.
I don't ever burn out.
That's not true. Yeah, so you got burnout. You got burnout so many times.
You're the opposite of what you're the least burnout I've ever seen you right now. Actually, like you're able to
it all.
Yeah, you're able to push with intensity now. Your training volume's pretty high. It's not like workload is any less.
Yeah.
Brandon and I were talking about the other day. I was like, man, Max is like.
Not angry about things all the time.
Yeah, I mean, not broken, not angry, just able to push in training more now and to be able to, like, you're getting better a lot faster than a lot of us here on site in terms of, like, the coaches that have been training for a long time. I didn't say you're better than the coaches on site. I said you're getting better faster.
Max did beat me in every single workout in the Quarantine Classic.
Did he really?
Yes.
Yeah.
I did not beat you in every workout.
You didn't, but I have to try now to beat you. I used to not. I used to be like, cool, Max is doing that on me. I'll just feel good about myself for a little bit.
Is this podcast really just how much more fit has Max gotten?
I also think it may have something to do with his programming bias and the fact that there wasn't a single...
Hold on, no. Not my programming bias. Him and Brandon both contributed.
What, do they not like muscle ups? What's wrong with you guys?
We took that out because we assume logistically most people at home gyms wouldn't have had that.
I think the programming bias,
was
whatever you want to call it, was the 12-week CrossFit cycle by McG that led up to this point that got Max into this pristine shape.
That's what it was.
And now it helped you dig out of burnout. And all I remember is the last 3 weeks of people saying, oh my God, those assault bike CrossFit intervals are so hard.
Yes. Welcome to the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, so today's topic is dealing with training burnout. It'd be cool to share some stories of how we each individually kind of dug out of our own holes. We've all got experience in that, as well as like things that we've done and applied to our own clients based off what we learned or just things that we've tried. So who wants to start with
Max,
personal training story?
You have most recently come out of what I think is a phase of burnout. So why don't you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're different. I'll start at a younger
Recently,
age.
you transformed yourself completely from, barely training to...
Yeah, but that's been it's still been over a year, I think, of consistently following the competitors program into the design.
Yeah.
And then adding volume to it.
But prior to that, I remember some of the steps you took. I remember there was, you laid out a training program for yourself, and it was like a little calendar, and you had it posted right up.
Yeah. I think first is identifying what it is that causes the burnout. I think the two major ones for me, the first would be like ego driven. It's just not like being a competitive person and being in a competitive culture and just not being good enough. Is like, there's nothing you can do on a day-to-day basis if there's a bunch of people with 8 years of continuous CrossFit training to just show up and be like, I'm gonna bring it today. Like, it's you're not gonna do that. Or I wasn't gonna do that. Maybe there's like a couple gifted people.
But now you have done that. So now you have closed the gap against versus those people to a huge degree. I mean, you've gone from like what would have been completely not competitive to potentially beating people in workouts.
But
the same exact community.
Yeah, but the burnout symptoms were a result of not being able to cope with it.
I guess what I was getting at is that, like, I think that has a little bit to do with like the gap between what you perceive as where you want to be and where you are.
Yeah.
And you just perceived that gap as too big. But then at some point, you just got over that and started moving towards it. It's like, okay, now I'm done feeling sorry for myself about how big this gap is, and I'm just going to take the first step.
Yeah, the psychological side of it, which is I think, just dealing with your ego, getting over, like, you're not good enough, you're not where you want to be, once you can reconcile that, you can start to come up with something actionable. But if you're dealing with the psychological stuff and you're down on yourself and you take like even joking things personally, like people saying like, oh, you're gonna do this workout with me, like I'll get a win or I'll beat you by 2 minutes, like that shit, it does impact you, even if you're just like in jest with your friends, and it will undermine your confidence. And I think at some point you got to figure out what that process is for you to get to a state where you're doing it. Not for me, it was doing it because I felt like I had a moral obligation to figure out how to redevelop my passion for doing what I love doing for other people. It's like find a path that works, that helps you progress, that gives progress to your suffering and gives you meaning in your training, and figuring out an intellectual construct that makes sense. And I feel like that was the first step for making some sort of a meaningful structure to what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. But that's a very different process than like before when I was broken. Because like the injury process is different, because then it's like, well, now it's not just me feeling emotionally ready to train. It's like my back hurts so bad I can't bend over. How do I get better?
But it can be argued that some of that might be
tied together.
Yeah, that the emotional state of burnout can lead you to be more sensitive to pain that you now just deal with on a daily basis. Like, I'm sure you don't wake up and your knees and back feel amazing right now.
Not 100% every day. But
and I think some of your sensitivity to that pain may be turned down. I'm sure you've seen that, where athletes, like, I think the best example of this, I had a masters athlete who missed qualifying for the CrossFit Games by 1 spot. And then all of a sudden she got the letter or the email from HQ that she did qualify. And prior to that email, her back hurt too much to train.
Yep. Seen that before.
And then all of a sudden she got that email and she put in the best training block of her entire life leading into the CrossFit Games, because she instantly had meaning.
Yeah. The psychology is a huge part of it. What your biggest burnout, at least the one that I saw, was like post-grid.
Yeah, I think that too was a culmination of a new sport, athletes being thrown into it with really like no idea on how much we need, how we need to actually train this sport, because it's super intense. It was loading and movements that like really hasn't ever been done before.
Full speed.
And it was, and we basically were like, they were like, look, you've got to accomplish these tasks, these tests, and you have 2 weeks to do it. And you're basically just force feeding yourself to get into it. Like all of a sudden, having no training volume of doing touch and go hey power cleans, within 2 weeks, I need to be able to do 3 sets of 10 unbroken at 245 pounds. It's like
at full speed.
Yeah, full speed.
Slamming
after doing 3 minutes earlier, doing 30 deadlifts at 315 as fast as possible. So it was just a massive amount of intensity. And like you had mentioned that you started noticing things that were like your signals or your triggers that were something that continued to lead to burnout. And like I, at that time, was just ignoring all of those.
Yeah.
Right? Like I just had this like chronic neck stiffness, like blurry vision, like couldn't think critically, like, unproductive at work, like just a bunch of signals, and things that were going off that if you just continue to ignore that for too long, it takes, I don't know what, if there's like an actual graph or a pattern of how long you would expect to dig out of that, but you push through that for 3-4 weeks at a time, digging out of that can take twice as long.
Yeah, it's funny, like my own athletic quests, I think I've dealt with burnout so much, but for other people that I've coached, I think the process of burnout has been way less frequent, because I could be objective and perceive it and be proactive about preventing it from happening.
Yeah.
And it took me into my mid-30s to start to do that for myself. Like even today, yesterday I woke up and it wasn't even like my body feels good to go. Like I feel like I could push, and I have this mental like, you still are behind, you have to go. There's like this fire that every day I want to go, but I know like I can't do that. Like I'm gonna eventually have to take off. But my mind yesterday was like in just a torturous mental place, and I was like, you know what? We're going into a new cycle on Monday. Like I'm just gonna take it easy on Friday and Saturday. And those little decisions, even though they seem like, it's not that big a deal, it's only 2 days, they add so much in terms of what you can handle over the long term. And I've always done that with athletes. So I think it's just, you have to be able to do that with yourself, or if you have to have a coach, you have to be able to communicate when you're going into the burnout. Like when you gotta perceive it before it's like, oh shit, it's a problem.
I think one of the biggest challenges is that when people are in the throes of burnout, it's almost like it's impossible for you to see it. It's almost impossible for you to have any objectivity if you're the one that's in the state of burnout.
Yeah.
But someone from the outside that listens to your feedback on a regular basis, whether it's me as a remote coach or you talking to someone in person, you can literally hear it in their language. Like their language changes. It becomes way more negative. And they're like, man, I just don't think that there's any possibility I'm going to be able to do this. And like, I just don't feel like it. It's like literally they can go in the span of days from fired up, motivated to completely
doubtful,
completely a different person. It almost seems like,
this sucks, I'm not getting better.
And
seeing
don't
someone
recognize
lead
the
with all this
change.
energy and confidence, all of a sudden doubting and saying things like that, you're like, okay, that's a clear sign that you don't have the optimism right now, that you're on a path to continue to get better. So
I'll tell you, one of the things that I track in my athletes is what I call a motivation score. And I think that should capture for most people, like, are they hungry? You know, are they positive? Did they? And then the other one I track is their perception of training quality. So the two things that I tend to find when people are getting closer to burnout is their motivation goes down. Right? That's the symptom. But then they start to perceive their training quality is lower, even if
the performance.
It's good sessions. They'll have a good session, and it's like, man, you crushed that, and they're like, nah, it was shit.
Yeah, but it didn't feel good.
Everything
on paper looks solid.
You're going to deload, but I don't feel like I need to deload. That's only because you can't, you don't see from an outside perspective. And I think that, for myself in the past, that's been the challenge, is like, I just assumed I was invincible and I would keep going until something broke. I would never stop when it was like, okay, you know, I'm tired. Like, I don't really want to go do this. And I would just tell myself I was a pussy, and I would go in and I would do it anyway.
Which there is some value to doing that.
Let's say that's the challenge sometimes, is finding that balance, because I've definitely swayed on the other end of it too as a coach, where I was way too conservative with clients for a long time, and I was so scared to break them just because of my own personal experience of being broken. And that is just something you kind of have to ease back into and take some chances. Right?
You don't really ever get training progress without a little bit of breaking,
for sure,
in anything. And that's hard to say as a coach, because you're like, well, the value of a coach is like lowering injury risk, giving you a better opportunity at success, do no harm.
So
but it's
just
really,
to be clear, what do you mean by breaking? Do you mean breaking psychologically,
I
or
mean,
breaking
even like
physically?
Like, have you ever seen somebody that had a triple bodyweight deadlift that never strained a hamstring?
No.
Right? Like, I just think it's
no. I just thought it was important for you to be clear about what you were trying to say there.
I just mean like and maybe even some emotional burnout too. You do the same thing for 10 years to get better. Like, it's pretty unrealistic to think over the course of those 120 months, there's not going to be a 3 or 4 week period where you're like, fuck this, I hate everything about deadlifting, right? Like, people get burnt out from doing the same thing over and over again. And
as a joke, CrossFitters can't complain about being burnt out, because the variety of movements you can train is so high.
I knew where you were going, and I just wanted to stop you before you even started.
Imagine like being a swimmer,
Constantly
a track
varied.
athlete. Like, I'm like, what do you have to complain to be burnt out about? Do anything. Do anything. A track athlete, like, you're literally training for
run in a circle,
3 or 4 years to knock off
line.
a fraction of a second off a 100-meter sprint. It's like, how many movements can you possibly do?
I think it's easy for people to be motivated when they're tackling a new task or learning skills, because the adaptations and the skill acquisition and all that stuff happens so fast. It's like one of those things where it's just like the reward is so quick. And then all of a sudden they get into the mid range of their career, and that's when you're almost guaranteed to see the first. You're almost guaranteed to see the first burnout. Right when someone makes a transition from beginner athlete, where you can just throw anything at them and they're going to adapt, to all of a sudden, like, the next step, or taking the next step, is hard as fuck. And they're just really struggling to take that next step. And that's when you see the first burnout, I think, for most people.
What are your thoughts on, so my thoughts have changed on this a lot, overtraining or adrenal fatigue, because that used to be one of the markers from a lot of evidence-based coaches, especially in CrossFit, is like, oh, go take salivary hormone testing or go take blood work. You're overtrained because of what we see in this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think overtraining is still a real thing. I know I've heard a lot of people talk about there's no such thing as overtraining, there's only under recovery, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that overtraining is a real thing, that there is a point where you're just doing too much and people are failing to adapt. That's the definition of overtraining. Right? It's not necessarily that you're doing so much that the person's so fatigued they can't continue. It's just you're doing more than they can adapt to, and therefore
the biology's breaking down.
I think something I'm paying more attention to with that, because it is like, it's really hard to define, you know, what is technically overtraining when you're trying to push someone
and
to
what's
do things.
Burnout versus overtraining.
Right. And what I measure now is how quickly they're getting over that overtraining cycle, right? Like, if they're over it in a week, they're not that overtrained. Like, if you give them a short 3 or 4 day.
That might be overreaching. I know there's a lot of terms
but
that
if it's like 3
out.
weeks later and they're still having the same nagging injuries, their sleep is still messed up, then it's like, all right, we dug too deep.
Yeah, like we need to have a change in course or a change in action plan.
Well, also remember that people can be overtrained and still be motivated. I think to differentiate between the two, like overtraining and overreaching is a decrease in performance. You can be burnt out and still be performing well. You just lack the motivation and meaning to push yourself in training.
Do you see that often?
Which?
Someone's still performing well, but mentally burnt out,
Absolutely.
and vice versa?
Absolutely.
I
think
only
you
see that
both.
in pro athletes, notably the person who cohabitates this space. Travis.
That's what I was going to say. Is I think you'd be more likely to see that in people who whose livelihood depend on competing, where they're just like they go out there and. Cedric would probably get mad if I recalled this, but when he was at French Throwdown, he just didn't want to be there. Here he is in second place. You know what I mean? Like working his way through the weekend, and he kept telling me, he's like, man, I don't feel like myself. I don't really want to be here and compete right now.
Yeah.
This isn't what I want to do. But he's sitting in second place at a sanctional, right?
Yeah.
It's like performing really well, but not particularly motivated to be there anymore.
Yeah, professional athlete burnout, I feel like, is a little bit different than what most people I'm talking to in this is like. Training is probably your passion or maybe a little bit of like something you support your career with. Like I'm not being paid to do Metcons.
Yep. I was just about to say, this sport attracts a lot of very tough people.
Yeah.
And that can be a double-edged sword in this, right? And I don't mean like the higher level athletes. I mean the people that aren't getting paid to do this, that are beating themselves down on a daily basis.
And striving for progress in really difficult shit. Like a 10-minute assault bike test and going through 6 weeks of progressions to get better. Like if I told my brother, who's really into fitness, to do that, he'd be like, why?
It's going to hurt so bad.
Like what? One test and he'd be like, I don't like CrossFit. So what about strategies to get over it? So strategies mentally, like we talked about my psychology of getting over it, cognitive behavioral therapy.
What I used to do is I used to have people rest, and I think that's the wrong strategy. I think when people are starting to get burned out, rather than telling them like, okay, we need to back off, we need to have you, take a week off. Take a week off. No, I don't think that's I shouldn't say it's the right strategy. I think a better strategy is to say, all right, let's identify one thing you can do today to like get yourself back into a rhythm. Even if it's just like going into the gym and put a bar in the rack and start doing back squats. Start at 95 and just slowly build. Do like sets of 5 back squats until you feel like you're done for the day. But at least you've laid one brick in the path moving forward. And I found that when you do that, you're starting to get people back in the habit of being themselves as an athlete again.
Yeah. I think there's a way to continue to provide challenges without it without it moving them backwards, right? Like without it slowing their progress, right? So like Paul Chek coined the term working in versus working out, and like that really stuck with me when I heard that several years ago because you're still working. Right? You're still being an athlete, and you're not taking away that identity from them, being like, just go do something else for a little bit, because they're like, I don't want to stop being an athlete. I just don't want to hurt anymore. So like providing something, like you said, a stepped process to get out of it is way more proactive.
I don't have the motivation to hurt right now, but I think it's still important to go out and do something that kind of moves you forward, whether it's even just going in and doing some like basic mobility work, but still taking steps towards the end goal, but recognizing that you're not always going to have the motivation to just go out there and absolutely crush yourself for a 10-minute assault bike time trial.
One of the things I think that has been, super valuable for me as a person is when I would get burnt out in the past, it was almost like whatever mental construct I had about why I was doing what I was doing got challenged and broken. So I was in a headspace, I'd be super fired up, I'd go into the gym and like my full focus on everything that I was doing, and it feels so good and you're progressing. And then something happens, like whether it's just like the burnout being triggered or your body's getting beat up from doing that and it breaks. And I always thought, I gotta get that back. I gotta get that headspace.
I need to feel like that
I
again.
need to get that back. And it's chasing that, I think, and trying to get back to that. And my concept of being out of the burnout was thinking that I would be out of it when I got back to what I originally had in my headspace. It took me
You were really deconstructing that and building a new headspace.
A new one. And I think that was the process, is trying to figure out what is the headspace that I could be in that is maybe a little bit more balanced. Like it's not full of fire and it's not full of passion and it's not gonna like take every fucking risk possible with every weight possible that's more likely to break me because I'm like, oh, well, this is heavy. I'm going to try to pull it as hard as I can, even though I've never pulled anything close to it and I've never built any technical practice at this weight. I'm just going to fucking do it. That mind state got me pretty far pretty quick, but it broke me a lot. And then as I deconstructed that headspace and got burnt out, I would reconstruct one that was just a little bit smarter and a little bit smarter. And then eventually I realized, I'm like, oh, that's the process. And then when you realize that you're in the process, then every time you have these fluctuations where you're like, oh, I got to take a step back and go easy for a week, it doesn't feel like a burnout because it's like, oh, well, that is the process. It's like, There's trying to go somewhere over there, but it's just like...
I think it's important to constantly have a little bit of hunger.
Yeah.
Right, like to always be a little hungry to still want to get back into the gym. And that's something that just came to mind that like, I think that it's important to identify what the type of burnout is. It could be progress burnout, it could be a physical burnout, because how you approach those is different. What we talked about is probably more of a physical burnout where the athlete's still motivated, but you want to continue to challenge them in a way to get through it. A progress burnout, I think the approach might be, or that I've seen helpful sometimes, is to actually pull the training away from them to make them want it again.
Yeah.
Right? Because
don't train. That's like postseason. Don't train again until you want to.
Because
like,
if you're not excited to get in there and get
bad.
after it, like you're kind of wasting time. It's not great training.
Yeah. Noah's like that. Almost every competition we finish, I don't write programming, and then he comes
big training
back to
lulls
me
afterward.
Well, he'll still train. He'll just go in and do peak classes. He'll do his own thing, and then he'll come to me and say, "I'm ready for structure." So that's
way better than you being like, hey, you ready yet?
Yeah,
Hey, you ready yet? And then
yeah.
you get like half results written programming, and it's like, you're like, they're not in it.
Yeah, this is, like, why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is like the very first thing you talked about, which is, okay, here I am, and I want to be, here's where I want to be. I want to be competitive with the coaches and the community that's at Training Think Tank. And where I'm at now, I'm so far away from it, I just can't imagine all the steps that are necessary for me to get there. That's burnout, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm so far away from where I want to be. And I think one of the things that you can do is, as a coach, you can sit down, like, had I recognized that in you 4 years ago, I'd have sat down with you as a coach and been like, all right, Max, we need to talk about goals. But instead of talking about like what your end goal is, let's just set like some little day-to-day process goals, little steps.
Reachable, attainable.
Yeah. Like you want to get here, well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to get on the assault bike every day.
Yeah.
And use 10 minutes of warm-up on the assault bike so we can start building some capacity, because you lack that right now. And just like identifying little tiny behavioral changes that will eventually add up to getting what you want, and keep them so small and manageable that they're not intimidating to begin, but then start to build momentum as they see success. I think that's one good strategy.
On your pattern, it sounded like originally you came in and the goal was beyond reach and trying to chase it down to basically be competitive with those in the gym that were very fit and consistent at that time, beat you up and broke you, almost made you apathetic to it, right? Like, the challenge, it wasn't realistic. You made it more focused on intrinsic style training where you're focused on your own goals, your own progress, your own improvement. And I think that having a separation of that, which for athletes from time to time, is super important.
Yeah.
Where you get out of the world of training to compete with other people's scores and you have your own for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that going back and forth is important.
Yeah, I think it's the why. So like, as a younger athlete, especially in sports that I was better at, like I'm not really that good at CrossFit, and I never really was. I mean, I made it to regionals, but my ceiling in this sport as
I made it to regionals. I'm not really that good at CrossFit.
Well, I mean, like relative to what I was as a wrestler, like the skill level disparity was way different. So in that, my standard was win. And I was unhappy with winning. So I brought that same mentality to CrossFit, but I didn't really have the goods or the training background to support that. And so that broke me, and I think reconstructing my why fixed the brokenness feeling or the burnout feelings, because it's like, well, why do I do CrossFit? Well, I want to make sure that I can develop a subset of skills in here so that I could teach beginners or teach advanced people or be able to perceive what's going on and try to conceptualize, well, what do I engage in my own body so that I can communicate a message? Like, doesn't matter at all if Mike beats me by 3 minutes in a Metcon for me to satisfy that goal of learning. So like, that's one. Having some sort of sense of pride that I'm pushing myself to do things that are really uncomfortable. So as you construct all those things, it's like, all right, I come in, I do a Metcon, I lose. My immediate thought is like, fuck man, I just sold out and I just lost by 2 minutes. And then instantaneously right after that, I have another voice in my head that's like, that's not the only reason why you're doing it. Pick your head up, go get the rest of your work done. And I just like,
you're not,
you can let
you're
it
not
go.
necessarily here to win.
Yeah, like you're not just holding on to that.
I need to do that when I go against Brandon. It's to the point now where I just don't invite him to do Metcons anymore.
He got mad.
He did the other day. He's like, why didn't you invite me to the Metcon? I was like, Oh, I'm sorry, man. You know what the truth is? You're too good.
I just don't want to do it because I'm tired of getting beat.
I just knew what would happen.
Travis just invited me to do the freaking Gary workout that Noah did tomorrow, and I'm like, no. He's like, why not? I'm like, because you're going to be 5 rounds ahead of me. 2
While
minutes
we're
into
doing the same workout
workout
structure, we're not competing in the same workout.
You're just going to make me feel bad about myself.
But along those same lines, like that, I feel like that has really informed the way I do goal setting with my athletes now. So I've gone from, all right, what do you want to be? Oh, I want to be a games athlete, to like, who do you want to become? What are the behaviors of the person that you want to emulate? And let's like reverse engineer that.
Yeah.
You want to be a games athlete? Well, then you need to be someone who engages in games athlete behaviors every day. That probably means you're training 5 hours a day. You're not doing that right now. Well, let's work on building your training volume up until you're training 5 hours a day. Okay, the next behavior you're not engaging in is eating like a games athlete, right? You're not eating 5,000, 6,000 calories a day. Well, that's the next thing we need to make sure that we're tackling, versus saying, I want to be a games athlete, as if achieving that standard is going to change who they are. It's like, no, you become a person who can achieve that thing. You don't aim at the thing.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right, so mental burnout strategies, construct a why, step away from intense training or come into training with a different mind state. What about something that is more physical and tangible, which is chronic pain? Because I know for myself, that was the prior to like, hey, I want to get back into CrossFit and have fun with my friends and be part of the community. It was, I can't move.
You went
Let's
through
cover
a similar
both of those.
process.
I like that, and let's cover like metabolic stress too, like how you manage
But with regards to
intensity
pain,
in metcons or conditioning.
Like in a singular session, or like handling 5 times a week and getting burnt out from wanting
both.
to face it?
I feel like even now I just
Yeah.
have the fire to be able to do like one hard metabolic workout a week.
Yeah.
But that also might just be what aging is. I don't
maybe.
know.
Like you go into it less. Yeah.
Yeah, the response is very different now than what it used to be for me when I do
when I
that.
was 25 versus
Yeah.
35.
But yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to disrupt the train of thought.
No,
So
yeah, my
the physical
my thought
burnout.
process was just what like
so
because they're
here's-
different, right? Like it changes your headspace, but I feel like that headspace, and maybe it's a chicken or the egg thing. That headspace felt like it was more, I'm getting all these signals from my body that I can't do this and everything hurts, and then that burnt me out. Whereas the other time it was, my body feels okay, I just don't like what my body can't do. Right? Like those were 2 totally different
Yeah.
burnouts, but
Yeah.
I've seen them both with clients where like people are like, oh, my back blows up every time I do this. I'm sick of my back blowing up. CrossFit has so much hinging. Every time I do pistols, like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But it's not driven because they're not doing well. It's because they can't enjoy what they're doing because of the pain.
Because
sure.
they have to
Yeah.
have so much will to push through the pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know one of the first things that happened to me, I know this happened to you, and it probably happened to you, is like you get in pain, like my knee was hurting. So the first thing I did is I reached out to all the people that I knew that might be able to help me. And I went through this process of like, hey, can you assess my knee, help me figure out what's going on? And like, literally I went through that process for like 2 years before it finally dawned on me that like, I just need to take responsibility for my knee and start dealing
it.
with this on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
Every day.
Otherwise,
Every
you
day.
will continue to be someone in and out of doctor's offices, chiro places,
Yeah. And not to
relying on someone else to fix you. And what
Yeah.
do you learn from that?
Yeah. And not to say that there isn't a lot of value in having regular therapy or
I
outside
needed
guidance.
I needed the guidance from those
Yeah.
people to guide me towards what I needed to do for my knee, but they couldn't do the things for me. I had to do it every single day.
And
when
you
I
got to
finally
develop self-awareness. Like, for myself, I think like one of the major things that really has been a theme of my life for the last, really since Utah, so probably 7 years, is dedicated movement training time. I don't care how stupid I look. I don't care where I am. I could be in the middle of a park with all sorts of people around. And if I feel like I want to stretch and roll around and close my eyes and do meditation-based breathing, and that stuff has had such a profound impact on like the working out versus work in. I feel like the deeper that I work in doing that stuff, the more frequently I can work out and push myself, because I don't know if it's like the yin and the yang. I don't know if that's what creates balance, but that's what feels like it creates balance. I come in here and I get super tense and super fired up and I hyperventilate and I hold my breath and I go into all these patterns of motion that are so non-longevity based strategies. Like if I walked around with the amount of tension that I have when I try to pick up a heavy back squat all day long, I'd probably die of a heart attack next year. So unwinding that and going and having some relaxation.
Please don't die of a heart attack next year.
For me, that balance is built through the extremes, and putting the time into self-development at the lower intensities. I feel like helped with getting out of pain, but I think can help you from having a nervous system that is not so hypersensitive to pain, right?
And when you say low intensity, you don't necessarily mean getting on an erg and spinning at a low intensity. What you mean is like moving at a low intensity.
Yeah.
It's something that's like, okay, I'm gonna just move.
Yeah,
just
like
move.
Little things. So like I have trouble with plyometrics, but I broke this ankle, I had knee surgery, I have a torn labrum in this hip, all these herniated discs in my back. So like doing a lot of repeated jumping doesn't feel good, and it never has. So one of the things that I need to do in here is be able to rebound off of a freaking cement floor with rubber that's this thick onto a wooden box and do it hundreds of times at a big body weight while I'm under fatigue.
You make it sound so appealing.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. And so it's like, all right, well, what do I do? Do I come in here and do 1,000 reps of box jumps until I can't feel my legs and potentially damage myself? Or can I go into my backyard on soft grass and bunny hop from one foot to the next? I can do 1,000 times more volume of plyometrics just playing around in my backyard, which then gives me more tissue tolerance to be able to do the hard stuff. So I think it's having a context for, okay, what's my body need to be able to do, and then how do I do it in a way that is low intensity to build volume and high intensity to build sport-specific skill, which I think just comes with training smarter over time.
I think for a lot of people, like that makes sense, and you've always been someone who's really good at doing that for yourself. I have not, right? Which is why
I hate doing movement work.
No. I mean finding the balance, being aware of that balance.
No, I actually mean I hate doing.
I want to go hard. Like I like to go in the gym and to train and go hard, not to recover. But I realize that if I don't do that, it takes away from my ability to express power.
But you found the slack line.
Yeah. So what I was getting at was. Two notes on that. One is like, I think that's where a coach comes in. It's super important, right? Like you've got to have someone, even if they're not necessarily writing the exact program for you, someone that can look at what you're doing and just be honest with like, this is not balanced. You're going way too much in the red and you're not getting yourself enough time in the green to recover, right? And I think the next thing from that is like, find some rules that you follow for yourself, right? So like, one thing that helped me kind of dig out of that overtrained period was when I went back into my training cycles, I followed a rule of, for every hard day, I do an easy day, right? So like if I have a hard day that was, let's say let's just put numbers in place, over 85% of my maxes when I'm lifting, or over 90% heart rate in a Metcon, I would consider that like a hard day. A day that needs recovery.
Yeah. Well, you built the engine path that way too, right?
I did, yeah. I made sure there's a balance of them all. Yeah. Anyways, following that rule is just like, it's a super simple way to make sure that you're not overdoing it. And like so many people, when they come to me and they're broken down, or current clients are like, hey, my hips are hurting again. I'm just like, have you been doing like your squat protocols daily? Like, actually, no, I haven't. They just need the reminder.
Yeah. I think there's basic movement. So I say I hate doing movement work, but that's not entirely true.
Yeah, I mean, you meditate.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
I do enough to make sure that I can continue to do the things that I love to do, but I do the minimum that's required in order to allow me to do the things that I love to do. And I found that to work well for me. But I also have more things to balance in a day than... than you do.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's really children, I think. If
I
you
think
were
it's
at
children.
home and you didn't have two children, you can
all I
go
do
out
is
in the
move at
backyard and play. That's gonna be my secret.
Yeah, the stressors
my
are
secret task to reel everyone in.
There are more stressors as you age that impact your training versus 10 years ago when I started this. The only stressor I had was whether or not I failed in that training session or not.
Yeah.
You know, like,
it's like that
was like the only thing I remember worrying about. It was like, man, like I didn't meet my expectation in that workout today. God, life is terrible.
And it's all you think about.
And that was it.
Your entire life is terrible because you didn't have a good training session.
Which, I mean, I think that you need that pressure sometimes.
If I based my life upon how the quality of my training session or my perceived success or non-success of my training sessions currently, I would probably be the most depressed human on the face of the planet. My training has been terrible for the last 4 years.
You had to adjust and shift your expectations in your training a little bit.
Absolutely.
From a practical training standpoint, I know I talked about all that movement work stuff. I don't know if people would know where to get it, but we have a free YouTube movement archive that has positional breathing, locomotion and flow, loaded stretching and isometrics, just a whole bunch of strategies for people. You can design your own if you want to, and it's free. You can just go on there where I kind of explain what the strategy is and give some demos and examples of them. We have the movement course in the classroom. I think pain is really something that if that's inhibiting you and that's part of the burnout, having a coach, having professional guidance, having somebody that can help you recontextualize pain is super important. Now, I went through that process myself, and I'm stubborn as hell. So like a coach doing it might not have been able to be successful with me specifically. But for most people, helping, like having helped people through that, I feel like one of the biggest processes is understanding the intellectual side of like, oh, pain doesn't mean I'm broken. It's such a simple thing to say, but it's very hard to believe. Like
getting that.
Yeah, like, oh, my shoulder's in pain, but it doesn't mean that there's something torn and I need to get surgery.
Yep.
It could just be there's pain in there. It's a signal. Now, how do I work through the signal to redevelop strength and use it as a tool for cultivating farther self-awareness, which I think is just.
I think the first time you work your way out of your own pain, that's like a monumental moment in your own training, because now you have the confidence and the ability to know if this happens again, I'm not scared shitless of it because I know I can work through it again and like figure my own way out.
Yeah.
However, if you don't and you just constantly rely on people to just fix it for you, you don't learn anything. And I just say that not to sound like a parent, but like it's so important in training because it helps you get over the risk of getting hurt again.
Yeah, the fear of re-injury is one of the biggest things too that inhibits power. So for a performance athlete, when you're scared of getting hurt, you're actually going to have your nervous system inhibit your ability to put out what you need out of it. So the mental construct of burnout, when it is related to pain, is something that's super important to get over. So I know there's some athletes that are out there that actually just have almost like a masochistic relationship with pain. And I remember meeting them and I'm like, what? Like, you want to hurt? You like hurting? And to me, I'm like, I would like to be in a comfortable bed being fed pizza in air conditioning. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But if you...
Sounds amazing.
In a comfortable bed, being fed pizza.
I don't even want to use my arms. That's how lazy I can be.
I don't know, I kind of want to fold the pizza myself and feed it, but maybe I'm masochistic.
There's something tactile about folding
What's wrong with you?
I guess I'm masochistic. I want to feed myself my own pizza.
This backfired. But if you are in that level of pain and that's the thing that's stopping you from wanting to train, I think doing some learning, doing some like actual deep digging as to like what is pain, how can I get out of it, how can my breathing patterns be influenced, my hypersensitivity to pain, can really help you fall back in love with training. I know really that's what happened with me. I used to be the highlight of my life was going to the gym or going and playing sports with my friends.
Yeah.
The thing that stopped that was pain. It was like, I'd be going and I don't want to play pickup basketball because my knee hurts so bad I can't jump.
Yeah.
And then that took away the love of the game. When I figured out how to unwind that whole pain cycle and I could do the things that I liked without pain, it was like the love of the process started to come back. And I feel like most people, if you could develop that, would probably be healthier and perform better over time.
Yeah, I think that's the approach you need to take if you don't want to change goals. We talked about earlier, we've seen a lot of people have really good bounce back after shifting the focus a little bit, where it's like, oh my God, I can't snatch because every time I set up in the bottom position and pull, it hurts my back. And it's like, change the focus for a little bit. And how many times have you seen someone just not snatch for a while, do different movements, and they come back because the pain is gone?
And
they're
PR in their third session.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know. Like, it goes against everything I thought I knew about training. Like, we went through like 6 weeks of snatch progressions. You take 3 weeks off and not doing it, and now you go PR. It's like sometimes just being out of pain allows you to express power again, and it doesn't limit you. And I think that shifting the focus is another approach you can take.
Well, you said one of the most important things with getting out of pain was you said having a coach is helpful. I still think having a coach is helpful, but you have to do the thing. Like a coach can't do the reverse sled drags for you. Like those things have to be done, and they have to be done consistently. If you're in a pain cycle, like you have to do things to get yourself out of it.
Well, the thing is too about that, at least for me, is it seems like most people that hire a coach are willing to do the physical work, but the mental work, like whether that's reading, whether it's meditation, whether it's journaling, whether it's like evaluating a movement that they do. Like look at yourself doing a movement on video and like, all right, my right knee hurts when I snatch an overhead squat. Why? Well, watch yourself. See if you move. See if the pressure distribution is different on your knee. See if you move from... Now, obviously, a coach can help you see that. Like we've seen the patterns enough. We could point it out. But I feel like the most value is having the guide, but realizing that you're walking the path and they're like a Sherpa walking beside you, not necessarily they're the donkey putting you on their back and walking.
And you're not like just they're not the student stuck in a classroom with the teacher yelling at them orders, right? Like, I've given a lot of my athletes The Gift of Injury, the book.
That's such a good book.
Did it fix their back pain instantly? No. But their optimism to want to fix it was so much better after the fact. Instead of me giving them McGill curl-ups and they're like, this exercise is dumb, I don't feel anything. As soon as they read that, it's like, I'm on board with you now, let's go, let's fix this together. Like, I feel confident to do this.
I've always said athlete education is probably one of the most important things. You want to help athletes avoid burnout, teach them about burnout. You know what I mean? Like, teach them that when they get into heavy training cycles and their training volume gets high, that likely the quality of their thoughts is going to change. They're going to shift their thinking from, hey, I'm going to be able to reach my goals to I'm never going to reach my goals. Like, those shifts happen when they get tired, and educating people that is a normal part of the process, like you said, is an incredibly important part of being an effective coach in a sport like CrossFit where the volume has to be high.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten blowback where they're like, just tell me what to do. Like, I don't want to have to learn this. And I'm like, look, I don't think that this is the approach we can take for you to get better. I think you have to be willing to change as an athlete to be someone who is now willing to learn things and not just be told what to do all the time.
Got to be some ownership in the process.
I mean, that happens with maturity, I think, no matter what. I know for myself, coaching masters athletes is way different than coaching 20-year-olds because they have an entire life experience in their body with their patterns, with what they're good, with what their behavior profiles look like. They know what they want. A 20-year-old athlete has none of that. So I think you can kind of tell them more. But as you go through the process, and as you become a more advanced trainee, even if you're young but you've been training for 10 years, you got to take some of that burden back away from the coach.
Yeah, it makes me laugh because it's like you train a master's athlete and it's like the willingness to hurt is just a little different because they've burned the hand 100 times. You know? Whereas like the 20-year-old is just getting into it. And I remember I was the same way when I started. It was like,
make me hurt.
3 by 500 meter row at max effort, rest 5 minutes between each one. I'm like,
excited.
All right, I don't care. Now I'm like, what's this going to do to my week? Hold up.
Let me think about this. Better?
I'll do one of these.
You just start to learn. And I think that that's something that's really difficult to get over. And that's a whole different conversation is like once you start experiencing pain like that, it creates these patterns in your brain that probably won't let you go to places that you've done before, or it's very challenging to get there again.
So I didn't know what we were talking about. I mean, I knew what we were talking about, burnout, but I didn't know where the conversation would go. I feel like the end of this whole conversation, my thought process is don't try to get over burnout. Just embrace that you are going to burn out at some point, and it'll challenge your why and your goal. And if it's important to you, you'll figure out and you'll find the guidance you need to get over it so that you can continue. And if you don't, it's a guidepost that you reach where you're like, oh, I don't want that as much as I thought I wanted. Change your goal. So maybe it's not even like a...
Which is okay.
Which is getting over it.
The juice is no longer worth the squeeze.
Unless the goal is to win the CrossFit Games and you get paid to win. Unless you're a professional athlete.
But you could change it. You could still retire.
You could.
Yeah, like
there just might be bigger consequences for you than the rest of us.
Yeah. So,
anything else to summarize from that? I mean, I think recognizing what type of burnout it is too is important because how you approach that depends on that. Whether it's a mental burnout, a physical burnout, a progress burnout.
Well, I will also say that I think navigating burnout by yourself is a longer process than navigating burnout with a guide or with a coach, especially one who's worked with athletes in a similar situation to what you're in.
Yeah. All right, and then
they could say something simple like, just go rest a week. Everything's okay. Just chill out for a week.
As a final caveat, if you do have potential like real mental medical stuff or like, a real serious family situation, or sometimes those burnout symptoms could be the trigger of like some sort of underlying health issue, it does make sense to get it checked out. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just like normal athletic burnout, not necessarily medical health issues.
Good point, Max.
I want to make sure we say that.
Question.
Cool. Yes. We have a question from the audience member.
Before we end, I was wondering, what's y'all's experience with people burning out when they train by themselves versus being with a group? So like solo training burnout.
Yeah.
And when they get back with a group, does that fix it or is it still the same?
I think that falls more in line with a mental burnout because rarely, like, I see more people burn themselves out mentally training by themselves than they do physically because they're not overreaching to reach numbers that they can't keep up with.
Theirs is like
setting.
a monotony. They burn out from the monotony of training.
I want to clarify, because training with others, I feel like in some way maybe this group of 3 is biased in thinking that means CrossFit, like competing.
Okay.
But if you're just training, like if I came in here and did a strength session that was all at different percentages with friends, that would probably be more emotionally like fun and gratifying to me than if I was coming in here and it's like, hey, let's build to a max. So I think if we're talking about competitive training, a lot of times if you're with a group and you're feeling burnout, removing yourself and isolating can be good.
Yes.
But if you're just talking about, hey, I'm isolated and I'm having a hard time pushing myself, then moving from the individual side into the group can get you out of burnout. So I think it kind of really depends on the individual context of like, what's the purpose of training? Are you training just to look good, feel good, move?
Yep.
Are you training to be a performance-based athlete? Or are you training, like for me, the CrossFit stuff is filling a competitive outlet. It's like I want to measure myself up against my peer group. I want to talk shit. I want to have fun. I want to lose and feel the pain of loss and like have the triumph and be able to rub it in people's face that I worked for 2 years to beat them on a stupid ass workout.
Yeah,
so
you want
to me,
to leave your training on the edge.
Yeah, so for me, that process makes me fired up.
To that same point, I only will do Metcons with people, with other people. Like I do not do them by myself. If it's a Metcon and and I'm stuck at my house by myself, Haley's not going to train with me, I'll turn it into an EMOM. Or I'll turn it into intervals. I'm just not going to push myself in that way without an environment.
Yeah, so I think to kind of circle back to Chris's question, I think you can burn out both in an individual setting and in a group setting, but it's dependent upon what your training goals are that you should have some confidence and comfort going back and forth between both. Because sometimes we need social stuff to get out of burnout, like we just need to get out of our own head and have friends. And sometimes we need to get away from external influence and pull into ourselves and just turn on some music and be with our own thoughts to decide what we want to do with our training.
I think of the different environments as different tools. And as a coach, if you have the ability to do it, then what you should do is make sure that the athlete is training in the right environment for the right training
for the
stimulus.
things they maybe need to be pushed in.
Exactly.
Actually, that whole concept actually impacted how I'm training Noah and Travis for the games, because now everyone's isolated and they were having competitive burnout type symptoms. And because they were like, what am I training for? Why am I training? And I actually talked to them and I was like, let me integrate the design, our online training program, into your training program. So that way you can get some of that competitive outlet filled and then still have your individual stuff to optimally prepare you for the games. And that, I mean, at least over the last couple of weeks has been super valuable for Noah and super valuable for Travis in terms of like kicking him back into having his fire again. So I think it's like a process of knowing how to use and balance and juggle both tools.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we saw the same thing within the design. We created the Quarantine Classic, and a large majority of people responded very positively to that because the training why was, shifted a little bit.
Yeah, concrete.
There were some people too that like, I'm glad they stepped up and said something. They're like, I did not need to do this weekend. Like, life is hard right now.
Yeah.
Don't need like more competitive stress added to it.
They did it anyway? Like they told you afterwards?
Some people did it afterwards. Yeah.
I did it and I regret it. I did it and I regret it.
All right, cool. Well,
anything else?
There you go. Dealing with burnout.